Deep within the human experience lie truths capable of stirring profound emotion, yet their realization is absolutely essential for genuine well-being. This idea may seem bitter, but it is vitally important. If an individual truly cherished their inner essence, they would never tolerate certain behaviors in interpersonal relationships. They would never make excuses for indifference, endure neglect, or remain where their presence has become an unwelcome burden, where they feel superfluous or an unwanted guest. Yet, paradoxically, this is often precisely what happens. Individuals continue to settle for meager crumbs of attention and affection, stubbornly convincing themselves that the situation isn't so hopeless, that things could be worse. However, this self-deceptive logic is flawed. For every time a person settles for less than what they truly deserve, they subconsciously send themselves a powerful, destructive message. I am worthless. My value is negligible. In this moment of deep reflection, it's worth listening carefully to the wise words of the eminent thinker Carl Jung, whose insight pierces the very essence of human existence. The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Your presence here at this very moment is no coincidence. Deep down, you feel a resonance with this powerful message, trusting it. There is an unshakable belief that every word heard can become that very ray of light, allowing you to see what previously remained in the shadows of consciousness, what you previously didn't want to acknowledge. And this trust is highly valued, as it's known that confronting such deep, sometimes uncomfortable truths is not easy. Let these words resonate until the very end, for they hold wisdom capable of transforming your perception. And may this wisdom not remain solely within your consciousness. It is meant to be shared with others, so its light can spread as widely as possible. Allow yourself to realize right now why self-love is not just an elevated philosophical concept or a trendy idea. No, it is the only indispensable force capable of saving a person from destructive cycles of undervaluation and pain. It is the foundation of their true existence. Ultimately, a person does not accept less than what, in their deep inner conviction, they believe they deserve. And here lies the most striking and perhaps the most difficult truth to accept, one that, if truly grasped, can transform an individual's entire life. How others treat you is nothing less than a direct and unambiguous reflection of your own deeply ingrained belief about what you truly deserve. When you allow yourself to be treated with indifference, it means that deep within your being, you perceive such indifference as acceptable. If you continue to make excuses for those who hurt you, you unconsciously begin to feel that this is the inevitable price of affection. When you settle for meager displays of attention, agree to extremely limited terms, or remain in relationships that drain your vitality, the reason isn't a lack of opportunity to leave such a situation. On the contrary, it indicates that you have not yet grasped the true worth of your own person. Until this realization dawns, you will inevitably allow the same destructive scenarios to repeat. If you possessed genuine self-love, you would never agree to incomplete, fragmented relationships. One can only imagine a hypothetical situation where someone is offered a relationship filled with genuine affection, deep respect, strong emotional stability, and sincere fondness. Would they accept it? Many would probably assume the answer is yes. However, there's a harsh reality that a significant number of people prefer to ignore. If an individual has never worked on developing their self-worth, they will unconsciously sabotage their own well-being. Doubts will arise, a feeling of incompleteness, a conviction of their own inadequacy. This happens because such healthy interaction won't generate the familiar emotional emptiness they've grown accustomed to in destructive, toxic relationships. What would a person do in such a situation? They might well stay with someone who provides only the bare minimum, because that's the interaction pattern they're used to. Often the only understanding of love available to an individual is its conditional, precarious, and anxiety-inducing form. And if this perception is the only one known, then it's what they feel compelled to accept. Thus, the bar a person sets for themselves becomes the level they ultimately settle for. To illustrate this point, imagine the following situation. When you go to a restaurant and are served a dish you didn't order, something completely unsuited to your tastes, would you accept it? Hardly anyone would silently sit and eat just because the food appeared on their table. Of course not. You would immediately send back the unwanted meal, demand what you truly desire, and absolutely refuse to settle for less. However, the question arises, why do individuals often accept such circumstances in personal relationships? Why do they continue to stay with what they are given, even if it doesn't align with their true desires? Why do they settle for the bare minimum, despite it being internally draining? The answer to this question is quite simple. They haven't yet realized they are entitled to more. It's not that love is something to demand or beg for. The point is that when a person gains genuine self-worth and begins to love themselves, they naturally stop tolerating what doesn't suit them or align with their inner needs. If you truly valued yourself, you would never agree to baseless promises. If you possessed genuine self-respect, you wouldn't linger in places where your presence is perceived as superfluous or unwanted. True self-love wouldn't allow you to constantly make excuses for someone who offers only the minimum attention needed to keep you around, but is absolutely insufficient for genuine emotional security or stability. For true self-respect is manifested not in declarations of self-worth, but in concrete decisions, what you are willing to allow into your life and what you decisively reject. This is the root of why you continue to remain trapped in unsatisfying relationships or situations. Here's the harsh reality. Poor treatment isn't due to others' inability to love you, but because you allow such treatment. This happens because in your mind, the thought has taken root that if you reject the current situation, no other option will simply arise. You fear that demanding respect will earn you a reputation as difficult or inconvenient. Or you are convinced that setting clear personal boundaries will inevitably lead to your partner leaving and leave you completely alone. This is the insidious nature of the situation. If you continue to be guided by fear in your actions, you will inevitably receive significantly less than what you rightfully deserve. If you devalue yourself, others will immediately follow your lead. By settling for mere crumbs, you cannot expect anyone to offer you more. If you continue to tolerate cold treatment, you risk eventually convincing yourself that this is the true nature of love. However, this is a profound misconception. True love is never a source of pain or suffering. It doesn't generate anxiety or force you to languish in anticipation, agonizingly doubting your own significance or adequacy. If someone causes such feelings, then in essence it is not love. And if you continue to tolerate such a situation, it's not because you lack the ability to leave, but because you haven't yet made the firm decision to value yourself highly enough to allow yourself to be free from this burden. A question capable of changing much always stands at the threshold of realization. Imagine a situation where you observe a close friend humbly accepting the same circumstances you are currently experiencing. What would you advise your friend in that moment? Most likely, you would say that your friend deserves much more, that there's no need to beg for someone's love, and that a truly loving person always shows genuine care. Then the question logically arises, why do you continue to tolerate such a situation? Yourself. Why do you stubbornly make excuses for something that, as you well know, causes you deep suffering and pain? The answer to this question, though it sounds harsh, is absolutely necessary for understanding. It happens because you haven't yet learned to truly love yourself. However, there is every chance that today this situation can change dramatically. For it is on this day that you make a conscious decision to raise your personal standards. You decide to stop settling for less and realize that you don't need to chase anyone to be worthy of love and respect. It is today that you begin to make your own conscious choice. Simply stating that someone deserves more is not enough. These are just words, not backed by action. If you truly harbored deep self-love, you would never accept a display of affection devoid of due respect. For love without respect is not a genuine feeling, but merely a painful addiction. And if this fundamental distinction is not realized, you risk remaining trapped in a destructive cycle where you constantly confuse authoritarian control with genuine care, cunning manipulations with authentic interest, and blatant mistreatment with true love. It is a common phenomenon that many people invariably find themselves in relationships that bring them suffering. What's most alarming is that they convince themselves that this is indeed love. However, it's important to understand that genuine feelings devoid of mutual respect lose their true nature, transforming into a pathological dependency. The root of the problem lies not in the excessiveness of the feelings experienced, but in a fundamental error. Many mistakenly equate love with the ability to endure any hardship and humiliation. If you truly valued yourself, you would never accept a relationship lacking due respect. For the moment, respect fades, love loses its essence, turning into pure dependency. However, the most alarming aspect is that many people don't even realize they are in such destructive relationships. They continue to stay because they mistakenly take simple attachment for true devotion, cunning manipulations for a display of care, and blatant indifference as a quirk of character of their partner. And even when others try to convey to them that they undoubtedly deserve much more, such people cling even tighter to the existing relationship. This happens because a false belief has taken root in their minds. To love means to show boundless patience towards any behavior. The fear of loneliness holds them back, as they believe that if they break off these relationships, no one else will be interested in them. Moreover, they are driven by the naive hope that if they show enough endurance, the partner will surely change over time. However, experience shows that such expectations are usually futile. The person remains the same. And what's even more detrimental, the longer a person tolerates disrespect, the faster their own self-esteem wanes, leaving them feeling empty and diminished. By accepting the absence of respect, a person inevitably loses their inner strength. A clear example is a situation at the beginning of a relationship when someone allows themselves to make dismissive remarks, demonstrates complete indifference, or simply ignores you. Feeling deep pain, you nevertheless choose to disregard it. You start finding excuses, convincing yourself that what's happening isn't so bad, or you harbor illusions that showing more affection will eventually change your partner's attitude for the better. However, in reality, an irreversible process of destruction is happening internally at that very moment. Your personal standards are undermined, your ability to firmly say, "I will not tolerate this," disappears, and the self-confidence needed to set boundaries weakens. And once you let the first instance of disrespect slide, subsequent ones are accepted with much greater ease. Today you're ignored, tomorrow you're yelled at and then completely humiliated. Each time you find explanations for such behavior, you lose more and more of your inner foundation until you reach a point where you no longer recognize yourself. When respect completely vanishes from a relationship, only dependency remains. A logical question arises: why do you continue to stay where you are belittled, where your personality is devalued, where no respect is shown to you in words or actions? The answer, though simple, is quite harsh, because there is a strong emotional attachment to this individual, because you are convinced that without them, you will feel completely empty, because you believe that perfect relationships don't exist, and you have to put up with the negative aspects. And finally, because deep down, the thought of being alone with yourself terrifies you. And here is the truth: when you lack self-respect, you don't find the strength to break off relationships that cause you pain. Not because you don't realize their destructive nature, but because you genuinely believe that nothing better exists for you. It is this belief that keeps countless people trapped in relationships where they are subjected to emotional abuse. This is not love, it is merely dependency. The trap of waiting for change often ensnares many. They reason, deep down, this person is undoubtedly good. They used to be different. Something probably happened. And when we're good together, it's just wonderful. As a result, such people become attached to an idealized image they wish to see, ignoring the reality of the situation and the person's true essence. They think that if they show even more patience, endure a little longer, demonstrate even more love and understanding, the situation will surely improve. However, contrary to these hopes, no improvement occurs. The reason lies in the fact that someone who has once crossed the line of respect is highly likely to do so again, and the longer an individual tolerates such behavior, the less their value becomes in the eyes of the one showing disrespect. For when someone realizes that, regardless of their actions, the other person will remain, they stop perceiving them as an object of love and care and begin to see them as a tool to be manipulated. If you truly valued yourself, you would never tolerate such treatment, because love, devoid of respect, ceases to be love. It transforms into an emotional struggle in which only one side wins, and it's never the one who tolerates. The question arises, how many more times will you allow yourself to be disrespected before realizing that this has nothing to do with true love? Tolerating disrespect is not a sign of love, it's a sign of fear. It's the fear of being alone. It's the fear that no one else will want to be with you. It's the fear of losing something that, in essence, was never truly yours. And if this all-consuming fear continues to dictate the terms of your life, you will continue to tolerate absolutely unacceptable behavior. You must grasp one of the greatest dangers that lurk: how the urgent need to be chosen ultimately forces you to tolerate the worst circumstances. This deep need to be chosen by someone pushes people to accept what is absolutely unacceptable. It's worth stating something that might cause some pain, but will certainly open your eyes to the true state of affairs. People stay in such relationships or situations not because their love is too strong or boundless. They stay because deep down they are overcome by the fear that no one else will choose them. And when this all-consuming fear outweighs self-love, a person begins to cling to anything that gives them a sense of self-worth, even if it destroys them from within. This is why they justify what cannot be justified. This is why they stay, fully aware that it brings them no benefit. This is why when someone ignores them, they feel deep pain. But as soon as they receive a drop of attention, relief washes over them. In their minds, being chosen means they are worth something, and this, unbeknownst to them, has turned them into their own worst enemy. When you are convinced that love must be earned, you are doomed to settle for meager crumbs. Consider this: from childhood, we were taught that love isn't given freely, it must be earned, that you must be good, understanding, patient, that you must prove your worth for someone to want to stay, that if you try hard enough, the other person will change, recognize your true value, and finally choose you. But this is where the insidious trap lies. Love is not conquered. If you have to convince someone that you are worth loving, then it's no longer love but desperate begging for attention. And the more they try to be chosen, the less they are able to see the reality of the situation. They stay not out of love, but because they believe that without this person, they are not good enough. And then they are willing to accept absolutely anything, just to avoid feeling alone. When the situation escalates into dependency, it's often observed how a person justifies actions that cause them suffering, simply because the one who inflicted the pain later shows the slightest affection. First, you might be ignored, then they text you as if nothing happened. First, you are treated distantly and indifferently, then a grand, demonstrative gesture follows. First, you are made to feel worthless, then they declare their love. And you remain in these relationships because in moments of such sudden tenderness, you feel that you have finally been chosen and valued. However, this is not a display of true affection, it's a classic cycle of intermittent reinforcement. This pattern of behavior is a subtle strategy that keeps you in a state of dependency, a kind of psychological game where you are given only the bare minimum of attention and warmth to keep you endlessly waiting for more. What's particularly troubling is that you gradually get used to this dynamic. Your mind adapts to receiving only crumbs of attention, and your body reacts with palpable anxiety as soon as there's the slightest distance or estrangement. Your self-worth becomes entirely captive to how the other person treats you, and if you don't recognize this destructive pattern, you risk spending your entire life waiting for someone else to finally choose you, completely missing the key aspect. The problem was never whether you were chosen by someone else. The true problem lies in the fact that you haven't chosen yourself yet. When you become dependent on external validation, your life inevitably loses control. If your self-esteem relies entirely on the approval or recognition of others, you are in an extremely vulnerable position. For if you are chosen today, you experience euphoria and a sense of completeness. However, should that same person turn away tomorrow, you feel worthless. When you receive attention today, you feel significant, but if indifference sets in tomorrow, you begin to doubt your own adequacy. Thus, your days are spent constantly measuring yourself through the lens of someone who often doesn't even know what they want. Isn't it time to stop being just an option and become an absolute priority? For there is one undeniable truth: there is no need for someone to necessarily choose you. True self-love is not about being noticed and valued by someone else. On the contrary, it manifests in your ability to see and value yourself first and foremost. And once this inner acceptance occurs, those who showed only half-hearted interest will naturally disappear from your life. This happens because a person who truly loves themselves will not fight for anyone's attention or approval. A logical question arises: how do you break this ingrained pattern of needing to be chosen? First and foremost, it is crucial to recognize and understand this ingrained behavioral pattern. If you constantly seek approval from others, you should reflect on the underlying reasons for this drive. From what moment did you begin to feel the urgent need to prove your worth? Who or what instilled in your mind the belief that you are not good enough on your own without external validation? And what will happen if you stop trying to impress others? Secondly, it's essential to abandon the perception of attention as a reward or a valuable prize. You must understand that attention is not synonymous with true affection or love. Receiving external validation in no way increases your intrinsic worth. Whenever someone demonstrates indifference towards you, then suddenly shows some tenderness or care, it's important to realize such behavior is not a display of genuine feelings, but is in essence a form of emotional manipulation. Thirdly, it is fundamentally important to learn to put yourself first. There's no point in waiting for someone else to make you feel your true worth. On the contrary, you should start living with the realization of your own sufficiency, as this is an undeniable truth. And once this deep understanding is achieved, you will stop expending energy pursuing those who are unable to appreciate you fully. In this regard, the question arises: will you continue to passively wait for someone to choose you, or will you finally decide to choose yourself? The overwhelming need to be chosen often compels you to agree to any terms, settling for less. However, when an individual masters the art of being alone, when they become their own best choice, the entire course of events changes dramatically. Further on, it will be thoroughly revealed why the fear of loneliness forces people to cling to what objectively brings them no benefit, and ways to finally overcome this fear will also be offered. The fear of isolation often compels a person to idealize non-existent realities. It should be stated plainly and without embellishment: remaining in certain relationships is by no means due to deep affection. It is not dictated by the belief that the partner is the only one, or that fate itself brought these paths together. The true reason lies in the deep-seated fear of confronting loneliness. People prefer to put up with relationships that bring pain and disappointment rather than face the frightening prospect of having no one around. They are convinced that it's better to receive just a small measure of love than to be without it entirely. The thought of a future without this person's presence fills them with genuine terror. However, it's worth asking, is being alone truly worse than being in a union that is slowly but surely destroying your personality? For if you continue to cling to something that has long ceased to function, it is not a source of your happiness. On the contrary, it is merely a consequence of fear beginning to dictate its terms. When fear is the driving force behind a person's decisions, they are inevitably destined for defeat. It's crucial to view this situation from a specific angle. The human brain dislikes uncertainty, fears the unknown, and tends to cling to the familiar, even if it brings suffering. This is precisely why many individuals choose to remain in broken relationships, because it's what they know. They might realize it's no longer love, feel their unhappiness intensifying daily, and even understand that their partner no longer values them. Yet, they hesitate to leave. Leaving means confronting something they perceive as even more terrifying: total solitude. When a person hasn't mastered the art of being alone, a deep, pervasive fear begins to control them. This fear relentlessly suggests that it's preferable to stay with someone who doesn't genuinely care than to face oneself and one's reality in solitude. It pushes one to idealize the person causing pain, as this is the only way to justify maintaining what is often a destructive connection. It skillfully deceives, making one believe that losing the partner is the worst possible outcome, when in reality the most damaging scenario is continuously choosing someone who doesn't choose you back. There's a serious danger in idealizing what no longer exists in reality, what has been relegated to the past. Consider this question. If you were to meet this person today with a clean slate, free from the weight of shared memories and established history, would you genuinely choose them as a partner? If the answer to this hypothetical question is no, then a pertinent question arises: why continue to idealize someone who in the present moment no longer aligns with the image you've constructed in your mind? The harsh truth is, the attachment is not to the person as they are now, but to a memory of them. It's directed at the idea of who you could potentially be together. It's rooted in the comfort of being with someone, even if that person has ceased to be a suitable companion on life's journey. Perhaps the most detrimental aspect is this. When a person stubbornly clings to a past story, they unconsciously block their path to finding something more significant. At the same time, another individual might notice all the qualities in them that the previous partner failed to appreciate. However, this circumstance is often ignored because the individual remains trapped in a narrative whose ending has long been written. They convince themselves that no one else could treat them the same way, though in essence, no one should aspire to such treatment. They continue to prefer any relationship over the prospect of confronting the gaping void of loneliness. So how does one overcome this all-consuming fear of loneliness and stop idealizing what doesn't truly exist? First and foremost, it's essential to recognize a fundamental truth. The fear experienced before loneliness is nothing more than an illusion. You are not condemned to eternal isolation. Your inherent worth is in no way diminished by the absence of a romantic partner. You do not require someone external to feel like a complete and whole person. Whenever an inner voice plants doubts, you should ask yourself a piercing question. Do I truly want to return to what caused me pain, solely out of fear of being alone? Secondly, it is crucial to avoid the urge to fill any emotional void with various distractions. If you feel uncomfortable being alone, do not hastily try to occupy that emotional space with the presence of a new person. You must learn to experience this emptiness without crippling fear. Otherwise, without acquiring this skill, there is a high probability of endlessly repeating the same destructive behavioral patterns. Thirdly, you must become your own best life companion. You do not need anyone to give you a sense of self-worth. You also do not need a relationship to achieve a full existence. No one else is needed to breathe meaning into your life. And only when this understanding deeply takes root in your consciousness will the fear of loneliness lose all power over you, dissipating like morning mist. Then a natural question arises: will such a person continue to cling to a fading attachment that has long been gone, or will they finally let it go and begin to live authentically? It is the panicked fear of being alone that compels an individual to constantly justify what is, by its very nature, unjustifiable. And as long as a person allows this state to control them, they will inevitably lose their inner strength and shrink, losing their very self. One must deeply grasp a truth capable of forever changing their perspective. What a person tolerates and accepts today inevitably determines the suffering they will endure tomorrow. This principle is universal and undeniable. Whenever an individual finds justifications for anything that causes them pain and discomfort, they are effectively training their mind to accept even greater pain in the future. Every internal reassurance like, "It's not that bad, they'll surely change, the main thing is that sometimes they're kind to me," is a slow but steady conditioning of one's own consciousness to normalize absolutely unacceptable behavior. And at the moment this process reaches its critical point, once unshakable personal boundaries which a person would never have dared to cross begin to inexorably blur and disappear. Initially, a person might dismiss an insulting remark, then come to terms with the first instance of inattention, and then gradually get used to a series of constant arguments, unfulfilled promises, and indifference skillfully disguised as genuine affection. This continues until one day the individual realizes they have become someone who accepts circumstances they once believed they would never tolerate. And tragically, having reached this point, he or she often finds no way to escape the situation. This happens because when someone tolerates too much, their objective vision of the situation is lost. When a person tries to rationalize what cannot be justified, they cease to fully recognize their true worth. By becoming accustomed to a form of attachment that constantly causes suffering, the individual eventually comes to genuinely believe that this is what true love should be. However, this belief is deeply flawed. One should not beg for tenderness or plead for warmth. There is no need to exist in constant doubt about one's significance to another person. No one should face each new day with timid hope that this time the treatment towards them will improve. For when love degrades to a state of uncertainty, it ceases to be a genuine feeling. And if this crucial realization does not come in time, years will fly by, and the person will continue to agonize over the reasons for their endless suffering. There is a danger in gradually becoming accustomed to negativity. Consider this. If you were shown the full spectrum of what you would eventually have to accept within a relationship, every insult, every act of neglect, every instance where you were made to feel inadequate, would you choose to stay? Most likely, no. However, this is where the insidious trap lies. Emotional abuse does not descend suddenly. It infiltrates life in small, unnoticeable doses. It gradually conditions the individual, forcing them to doubt their own feelings, confusing them with alternating pleasant moments so that they find excuses for the unpleasant ones. And before a person can even realize what is happening, they transform into someone who tolerates what they should never have allowed. This is how manipulation works. It doesn't destroy the victim instantly. It depletes them gradually until destructive behavior becomes a habitual norm, and once the individual accepts this minimum, demanding more becomes practically impossible. The worst part is that problems that seem insignificant today can, over time, turn into something far more serious and destructive. True love never becomes toxic overnight. This process unfolds gradually. First, a person might ignore an offensive comment, considering it an accident or misunderstanding. Then they begin to find excuses for their partner's obvious neglect. Later, the individual reaches a point where they minimize or devalue actions that cause them pain and suffering. And when the moment of realization arrives, they find themselves caught in a closed loop, where what was previously considered absolutely unacceptable has now become an integral part of their daily existence. It is at this critical moment that understanding dawns. What the individual mistakenly called tolerance or leniency is in fact a direct ticket to inevitable suffering. For no one who truly loves and values another person would put them in a position that requires constant justification for their poor treatment. Herein lies the most ruthless truth. If a person continues to tolerate suffering today, their plight will only worsen tomorrow. If today they stubbornly justify what cannot be justified, then in the future the situation will become even more bitter. The reason is simple. No one stops their actions when they realize they can freely violate another's boundaries without facing consequences. If someone has caused a person pain and continues to remain a part of their life, it is not because the offender is unaware of what they are doing. On the contrary, they are well aware that they can make the other person lose themselves, dissolve under their influence. Then a natural question arises: how long will such a situation be allowed? For what a person tolerates in the present not only determines the extent of their suffering in the future, but also shapes their personality in the long run. Will they be someone who, looking in the mirror, feels pride for having shown courage and chosen their own peace of mind? or will they become someone who will deeply regret having allowed so much? Every day, a person remains in an undesirable situation. Every time they choose to ignore their own feelings, they inadvertently build a future they desperately seek to avoid. However, there is also encouraging news. Just as a person is free to choose what brings them pain today, they are also capable of choosing what grants them true freedom. And when this fateful decision is made, when a clear boundary is set, and one's own well-being is prioritized above routine, then the realization will come: life was not set against them at all. They simply found themselves surrounded by pain. But this can change today. It is the individual who decides whether to continue the same old story or to embark on writing an entirely new chapter of their life. What a person allows inevitably repeats itself. If they stubbornly continue to find excuses for actions that have none, they ultimately risk becoming their own most irreconcilable adversary. In this context, it's worth considering why many individuals ultimately inflict far greater harm and suffering upon themselves than anyone else in their lives. The true reason lies in the fact that a person devoid of true self-love inevitably becomes their own worst enemy. Let me clarify an important truth. The root of the problem often lies not so much in the person who caused the initial pain, but in the subsequent actions of the suffering individual themselves. The real difficulty is that after enduring harm, the person continues to exacerbate their own suffering. For every justification of what is unjustifiable inevitably brought them new pain. Every time they devalued or minimized their own feelings, they effectively wounded themselves. And every time they returned to an environment where they were no longer valued or respected, they plunged back into the abyss of self-destruction. Thus, gradually and completely unnoticed by themselves, the individual transformed into their most formidable opponent. And most tragically, this process remained invisible until one day, looking in the mirror, they suddenly realized that a complete stranger stood before them. They became someone who now accepts what they once resolutely refused. Someone who humbly tolerates what they perfectly well know harms them. Someone who, instead of resolutely standing up for their own well-being, repeatedly and submissively surrenders to the power of pain. At first glance, it seems paradoxical, but self-sabotage is often cloaked in the guise of love. Consider this. If someone allows themselves to make disparaging remarks to another, ignores their presence, or intentionally creates a feeling of invisibility, and that other person, aware of the pain being caused, continues to remain in such a relationship, then who is causing the most harm at that very moment? If a person stubbornly clings to someone who has unequivocally demonstrated their inability to change, who then prolongs their own suffering? It's easy to simply blame the other, claiming they lied, manipulated, or caused pain for no apparent reason. However, the most significant question is not about the other's motives, but about why the person allowed it to happen. For if, after all they have endured, they continue to seek justifications just to avoid breaking these ties, then the true source of pain is no longer the external subject, but themselves. And until this realization pierces their consciousness, they will remain a prisoner of a closed cycle, where the main adversary of their inner peace is themselves. In such a situation, suffering is generated not only by the other person's actions, but also by the individual's own choices. Every time a person returns to the source of pain, it is their own decision. Every time they find justifications for unacceptable behavior, it is their conscious choice. Every time they convince themselves that the situation might not be so hopeless, that the partner will change someday, or that perhaps the problem lies within themselves, they only exacerbate their own situation. However, this is a delusion. The root of the problem is not that the person is supposedly not good enough or valuable. The true difficulty lies in the fact that they continue to invest their energy and emotions in a relationship with someone who can never give them what they sincerely desire. And here, the fault no longer lies with the other. This is a circumstance that can only be changed by the person themselves. The most dangerous form of mistreatment is that which a person inflicts upon themselves. Allow me to present a hypothetical situation. If an observer daily saw someone repeatedly banging their head against a wall, constantly injuring themselves and experiencing the same pain over and over, what would they likely advise? Most likely, they would urge that person to stop, to step away, pointing out the senselessness of continuing self-torture. Then the question arises, why does the individual continue to do this to themselves? Every time a person returns to circumstances that have already caused them suffering, it is as if they are repeatedly hitting their head against the same wall, futilely hoping that one day the pain will subside. However, the pain does not go away, for the wall remains unchanged. And the true problem was never with the wall itself. The problem lies in the fact that the person continues to consciously choose to hit it. This happens because deep down, individuals sometimes mistakenly believe that pain is an inherent part of love. They continue to cherish the hope that one day this impenetrable wall will transform into an open door. And perhaps the deepest explanation lies in the fact that deep down, the fear of letting go turns out to be stronger than the fear of continued suffering. But a natural question arises, how long will this continue? How long will a person continue to put themselves last in their own life? How long will they fight for someone who does not fight back for them? How many times will they repeat the same story, naively believing that this time the ending will be different? You cannot claim to love yourself if you continue to choose what destroys you. You cannot speak of self-respect if you constantly allow what demeans and devalues you. You cannot declare a desire for inner peace if you continue to seek the company of those who have already clearly demonstrated that they can bring only turmoil and adversity. For true self-love is not formed from beautiful and empty phrases. Self-love is always an action, and if a person continues to act contrary to their own interests and well-being, then this is not a manifestation of self-love, but outright self-destruction. When a person genuinely loves themselves, they will never betray their own principles and well-being. This is an undeniable truth, sometimes quite harsh. If an individual truly valued themselves, they would not tolerate what brings them suffering and discomfort. If there were genuine self-worth, a person would not settle for empty promises and illusions. True self-love would not allow for the justification of actions or situations that are known to lead to destruction. Until this fundamental understanding is achieved, a person will inevitably betray themselves again and again, each time they neglect their inner intuition and desperately cling to illusions, closing their eyes to their own obvious truth. However, truth does not vanish into oblivion merely because someone prefers not to notice it. It is invariably present, like a persistent whisper in the quiet of the night, when the soul is heavy, and it causes daily pain every time a person commits an act of self-betrayal. May each person today choose inner peace, preferring it over all-consuming fear. May the decision be made today to remain true to oneself, even if this path is fraught with unbearable pain. For the pain of parting and letting go, however sharp it may be, is always transient. At the same time, the suffering of remaining in circumstances where there is no love and acceptance can last a lifetime. A natural question arises, will a person continue to betray themselves? When people consciously allow what they know for a fact causes harm, it's important to realize that the ability to let go is not a loss, but the greatest display of respect and care an individual can give themselves. Mastering the art of letting go is not a defeat or a loss. On the contrary, it is an expression of deep self-respect. If a person still perceives separation as something irretrievable, it indicates a lack of full awareness of what they are truly leaving behind. The essence is not the loss of love itself, but the liberation from the burden of anxiety, from agonizing sleepless nights, from the torment caused by feeling unwanted and ignored. It is also freedom from the oppressive uncertainty about one's place in the relationship, and from the bitterness of understanding that the other person never prioritized them as they did. Such a separation is not a loss. It is, without a doubt, the gaining of true freedom. Strong emotional attachment often instills the conviction that the act of separation is a form of punishment. The true difficulty lies not in a person's inability to let go, but in deeply rooted beliefs imposed by society or personal experience, which teach that such a step is a sign of weakness, defeat, not fighting hard enough, or capitulation to someone who might, perhaps one day, change. However, there is an immutable and sometimes cruel truth. Letting go is by no means synonymous with defeat. True defeat is to continue to remain in circumstances that bring only deep unhappiness. Defeat is endlessly waiting for an individual who has never demonstrated a true capacity for love to suddenly acquire that feeling. The loss lies in desperately clinging to the elusive hope that this person will one day reappear as the image one once fell head over heels in love with. But that image will not return. The reason is simple. The person, as they seemed, was never authentic. It was merely a fleeting version, a phantom that existed only during the initial, favorable periods of the relationship, captured in fragmented memories that the individual constantly replays in their mind, striving to convince themselves of the value of maintaining this connection. But the question arises, how much longer can this illusion be fed? Letting go is not a simple decision, it is a profound act of self-love. This is the key difference between a person who is capable of freeing themselves from the past and one who remains a prisoner of their experiences. The one who lets go does not do so because the pain has completely disappeared, nor because their feelings have vanished, and certainly not because they have stopped loving. They take this step because they come to the realization that staying in the same place means betraying their own soul. Why does this happen? Because when an individual stubbornly clings to a relationship that causes them suffering, they are choosing not true attachment, but only pain. And when someone demonstrates their disregard and the person continues to stay, it indicates not loyalty to one's own heart, but subservience to fear. However, fear should not govern one's life path. If you allow it to, a day will come when you look back and bitterly realize that you waited too long for what never materialized, and at that moment you will feel regret, not for having been able to free yourself, but for not having done so sooner. The act of liberation does not mean that the experienced history has lost its value. Many people hesitate to let go of a situation or person because they harbor an internal conviction. If they do, all efforts and emotions will have been in vain. It seems to them that if they let this person go, the memories will dissolve, the history itself will cease to exist, and everything that was created together will simply disappear. However, life's narrative is not erased merely because a person decides to move forward. Everything you have been through forever remains an integral part of your identity. But there is a fundamental difference between a memory that brings peace and a memory accompanied by pain. And until a person takes the step towards liberation, they will continue to indulge in painful memories. They will endlessly reminisce, obsessively search for signs where there are none, and reopen old wounds that should have healed long ago. But on that momentous day when the decision to let go is made, everything around will transform. Memories will remain, but they will cease to cause suffering. The love once experienced will remain real, but it will no longer bind the person. The experience will remain a fragment of their personal history, but it will no longer dictate the future. For letting go does not mean forgetting. Letting go is realizing that what was is no longer part of the present and consciously choosing to move forward. Here it is, the very decision capable of changing absolutely everything. You are invited to look at yourself, not with an ordinary gaze, but through the eyes of someone who rightfully deserves much more. You should realize with absolute clarity that you have given too much, having shown excessive generosity, and with firm conviction, even if it brings unbearable pain, understand, letting go of the situation is the only possible path. This is not a choice made because it is easy, but because remaining in the previous position is simply no longer possible. If an individual continues to remain in a stagnant situation, they will daily lose more and more of their true essence. Should they delay, waiting for a miracle, their inner strength will diminish with each passing day, and their spirit will shrink. For if they persist in clinging to what no longer holds meaning, they will steadily drift further from the person they truly deserve to be, from their authentic self. The inevitable question then arises, will they continue to cling to what has irrevocably passed, or will they finally demonstrate enough self-respect to let it go and free themselves? A pivotal moment for a fundamental decision has arrived. For it is today, here and now, that two fundamental paths open before them, either to continue recreating the old, worn-out script or to begin writing a completely new chapter of their life. And when they dare to take this momentous step, when they decide that their inner peace and harmony are more valuable than relationships that have long lost all meaning, then they will realize that nothing was truly lost, because the only real loss they experienced was merely the overwhelming fear of a new beginning. This individual undoubtedly possesses courage and undeniable worth, and on this day they definitively demonstrated it. For not everyone dares to look deep within themselves and realize they deserve more than they have. Not everyone possesses the inner strength to release what no longer serves them or even causes harm. Not everyone is capable of making the decision to respect themselves, even if that choice entails profound pain. Yet this individual did exactly that. On this significant day, a step was taken that will undoubtedly change their entire life. Following such a realization, it becomes impossible to ignore the inner knowledge that has been revealed. One can no longer settle for less than they deserve. They are no longer able to justify actions or situations that are inherently unjustifiable. And most importantly, they are no longer capable of betraying their own essence. The next logical step on this path of self-awareness is to embrace the affirmation, "I choose myself. My self-love is my priority." This phrase is strongly recommended to be repeated until it transforms into an absolute and unshakable truth, deeply rooted in their consciousness.